Hello, this is Julia Davis of Yoga Teachers Forum, and I'm here today with Susan Lodge, who is a yoga teacher, a teacher trainer, and she's written books about philosophy too. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Julia. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So Susan's going to be joining us for our next Teachers Forum in June, and she's going to be talking about yoga and philosophy and allowing us to feel into yoga and philosophy too. And I'd just like to ask you, Susan, where did yoga first come into your life?
Well, it came into my life in 1997. I just had a son, my second child, and I already had a daughter who was 3, and life was very busy. And I was looking for some physical movement because I used to dance when I was younger. But not competitive sport, nothing like that. Some physical movement, but also some space and some peace of mind in amongst this busy family. So I tried a few classes. I didn't know what yoga was really, didn't know anything about it. I tried a few classes, but the ones I tried first didn't really seem to be what I felt it was going to be for me or wanted it to be for me. And then I went to an adult education class with a teacher who was yoga for health trained. So it was very much about health and support and working into your own capabilities and modifying for different needs. And it was such a peaceful approach. I remember her, she used to say, Amanda Brown, she's a lifelong friend now. She used to say, calmly, gently, carefully. And I just found that I was very absorbed by it. And after the first lesson, I was driving home and I remember passing a garage, an Esso garage, and thinking something's really different here. And it was my shoulders were relaxed. And I hadn't realised that I was driving like this the whole time in the rush for here and there for the children and the family. So I noticed immediately that there were physical benefits. And then as I went more regularly, I found that there were other benefits that I didn't know to expect. So that was 1997. And then we went on to have another child. So we made it busier. Lovely, but busier. And I was just going to kind of a weekly class like this. And then in 2004, I began to practice at home at that time, but I was just going to one steady class. In 2004, we went to live in Spain. And the whole family went. And during the time I'd been practicing, I'd come across this book by TKV Desikachar. Lots of your teachers forum will probably have come across it on their training. But I found that the explanation of the teachings beyond asana and pranayama, beyond the practices, really made it a much more profound thing. And then I was interested in the teachings of Paul Harvey, but I couldn't go because my children were too young and we didn't have any time. I didn't have enough time because I'm right up in the North York Moors, and at the time Paul was in Bristol. And so I couldn't travel for the training that I wanted to pursue. So I was just doing what I could, and it was good. When I went to Spain in 2004, we didn't really know the area that well. And I was looking for a teacher, and my husband pointed to this little picture in the chemist and said, there's a yoga class. I hadn't seen anything else. So I went along, and it was so interesting because Paul's teacher, he was a 20-year student of TKV Desikachar. And the teacher that I saw in Spain was a student of Claude Marichal, who was also TKV Desikachar student. So it was so fluky that this advert and this class, that this teacher that I then went to in Spain, his teacher was a contemporary of my teacher, who is now my teacher now. So while I was in Spain, I wasn't working. I was a primary school teacher for 25 years, but I wasn't working while I was over there. So I could do lots of study, lots of really investigating and thinking, contemplating and practice. And so my interest in it really deepened there because of that spaciousness, which is not usually available within that family context. So after a year we came back, and I decided I wanted to take it further and train to be a teacher. So because of my first teacher qualifying with Yoga for Health Foundation, I did that because it's something that you know, isn't it? And I felt that I kind of resonated with how she was working. So I did that first. And then in 2009, I did the British Wheel of Yoga diploma as well, because I wanted to deepen my understanding and grow a bit more community around me for a teacher's community for me. I was still teaching in school and teaching two classes a week on top of that. Very kind of full on at the time, really. But what I found from my own practice and from those years was how supportive the practices are for mothers and wives and when you're working, and how it can help, but how sometimes your own development, if you want to go off and study, could feel limited by that context. So now a lot of my work is to support other people who kind of want to train, want to go a bit deeper, but might need some help to support it. And I try to have trainings for teachers in accessible packages, so it's not necessarily really very long, but it's on a particular topic, so that they can access it easily, really, within that family situation.
So can I ask you, because you have drawn a picture of a very busy life, 3 children, teaching as was it primary or secondary?
Primary.
Primary school teacher, teaching 2 classes a week. But what you said was that your practice, your personal practice, really helped you manage all that was happening. Yeah. So what did your personal practice look like at that time?
So this way of working is that personal practice is the core of it. So and that it's multidimensional, not necessarily just asana. So and the other aspect of it is that it's manageable, so it can be done daily. So it's not really long practice, it's something that fits in according to the individual person. So with this really busy time, I couldn't always, a morning practice was a no-no for me, even though it has its benefits. So I would have an idea of what my practice was, and I would fit it into the day at a time where there was a window.
Yeah, I love that, because that's my experience too, that the morning didn't work for me, because the morning was whoever was up earliest as a child bashing on my head or whatever it was, and then there's all that busyness. And so if the practice is at 2:30 in the afternoon for 15 minutes, then it is. If it's on the next day, it's at 4 o'clock. If the next day it's 7:30,
yes,
it doesn't matter. And it's really refreshing to hear somebody else reflect that yes.
Because often
I've got a routine, it doesn't matter.
Because often you don't even get out of bed before someone's in the bed with you.
Yeah, exactly.
So at that time it was simple asana, about 20 minutes, simple asana, some quiet breathing, 5 minutes sitting, and then and in a part of the day that it could fit.
Yeah. And
I've found as the children, because my children are now young adults, the youngest one is 18, just 18 last week. She had a lockdown birthday.
Oh.
Um, it was nice though.
Yeah.
Now it can be more for when I'd like it to, the practice can be more when I'd like it to be. And my practice now is given to me by Paul. And so he guides me with the content of that. And so, yeah.
So you're very much still supported by your teacher. It's really lovely to hear when somebody says, I have my guide that is with me, is kind of sitting on my shoulder or whatever. So can you describe how that's built, where you first came to him and how that kind of teacher, student, colleague relationship built?
Well, first it was very long distance, because I would kind of follow some of the things, some of the posts he was doing, and it's quite a while ago now. So about 2000. So I just remember noticing things that he'd written and thinking that it felt very relevant to me and how I viewed the practice, because the way that I feel about the practice is that it's a tool for life. It's a tool to help you see clearly. It's a tool to support you. So I remember him writing things and thinking, that kind of resonates with how I feel my practice works for me. And then I went to, because he's very much based in, or was very much based in the Southwest, he came to Nottingham to do a weekend. And he was talking about samskara, and I'm a visual learner, and he drew this diagram, which I'll never forget. And it was kind of a tower of blocks that were habits. And he was talking about building new samskara alongside. And it literally was like Lego blocks, and I was in Lego phase at the time. So the new habits that we build until eventually the other one doesn't go away completely. And I love that as well, because I really need to get to the practical, real, down to earth view of these teachings, that old habits, you can't just rub them out, never to arise again. And that we just build this stronger tower of habits. And eventually if we maintain it, it stays more influential than the old habits. So I really enjoyed that teaching with him that weekend. Still couldn't go down for any length of time or substantial. Finances are limited, aren't they, when the children are young and so on. So then I think it was about 2013, I started to think so I'd studied the sutra and everything at home on my own. So this was so interesting for me. Things like contentment brings supreme happiness. I felt that was so accessible, and I still do. That's why I'm so interested in working with them, because not even a beginner, but a person in their first class could link with that idea. So simple. But then there are others that you just think, that's so complex. I haven't got a clue what that means. So what I find now is that Paul can, or a teacher, whoever that is for an individual, can just shine lights in on things that otherwise feel inaccessible if you're just studying on your own. So
I just go back to that, because when we study with the wheel, we do a section on anatomy and physiology, a section on pranayama, a section on philosophy, and what was it about the philosophy side of things that, what drew you? Because everyone doesn't. Sometimes people get to the philosophy section of that learning and think, oh my goodness, I've got to read this, and this. Really, what I really like to do is stretch my body and breathe, and I can't be doing with these words that I understand some of and I don't understand others of. And if I wanted to do an English degree, that's what I would have, or whatever. There can be a real block to connecting with that. And also people who have issues around religion and around texts that are associated with some kind of God also, there are lots of barriers that could be there when we look at philosophy. So what was it about the philosophy that drew you in rather than pushed you away?
That's so interesting, actually, and also how you framed the question, because I did an English degree. That was my first degree, was English literature. So I love words. But I think it was on a much more profound level as well. I did enjoy the words, and I appreciate that for some people that the link isn't really there initially. So I'll just, before I did the British Field course, I was into this stuff. Okay, but if you don't mind, I'll just read a very short phrase, and this is why I got into the Gita.
Yeah, I'd love that. I love that.
So it's in chapter 6, which is about meditation. When the mind of the yogi is in harmony and finds rest in the spirit within, all restless desires gone, then he is a yukta, one in God. His soul is a lamp whose light is steady, for it burns in a shelter where no winds come. So actually that quote addresses 2 points that you've brought into your question. So it was the second part there, not the his soul, but then his soul is a lamp whose light is steady, for it burns in a shelter where no winds come. That was what I experienced in my first yoga classes, a sense of steadiness and stillness and coming in and seeing clearly, and I felt that it helped me be steady in the family. So that the steadiness was on the mat, but also could be off the mat.
Yeah.
And then the first part of that, it says, yoga is a harmony and finds rest in the spirit within, all restless desires gone. So that is something that I found so beneficial to work with, that idea of just the senses go out there looking for things, but actually we can be much more settled and more satisfied, more content if we can just not follow them all the time. And then he is a yukta, one in God. And now I was thinking, I'm not so sure that is open to everybody. But Desgachar says that yoga doesn't exclude anyone. So if you have a religion, you can practice yoga, and if you don't have a religion, you can practice yoga. But actually, the Gita is based in a Hindu culture. It's a Hindu text, so it's finding the points of discrimination. What is yoga? What is Hinduism? What is religious? What is yoga? Okay, so I appreciate what you're saying about it maybe feeling like that isn't relevant, that the teachings of the Gita are not relevant. Some people may feel that, but I feel that the teachings, the principles behind the teachings can be relevant, i.e. stillness is beneficial for life.
Yeah.
Without necessarily having to adhere to the cultural context of where yoga arose, where the practices of yoga arose from.
There's so much lovely in that. So the fact that you come from a passion for literature means that the words that were in the philosophy books spoke to you, and you enjoyed the words, the poetry, the storytelling that was in them. And because of that, you could find very easily, very naturally, the connection between your own physical experience of yoga and the words that were there. And because you can, and because it's a felt sense for you, then it becomes easy to translate that to other people. because it's your experience.
Because it's my experience.
Yeah.
And also an ongoing experience, because everything that I read in the texts and when I look at the history and so on, it's that relationship between a text, but what it actually means and how it translates into practice and how it translates into life. And that's really where I find it so beneficial. I find it nourishes my practice. I like to use quotes like that with my practice. That's how I started with it, really. I like to use it in my teaching, because I think I teach general classes. I do teacher trainings as well, but most of my work in the week is general classes. But I use these texts in general classes, small, beautiful, wise teachings that are absorbable and usable, really.
Yeah, it's interesting because often teachers say, how can I weave breathing into my teaching? How can I weave meditation into my teaching? Where on earth am I going to slot a philosophy practice into my teaching? And I think you're not going to if it isn't part of what you are. So I share poetry all the time in my teaching. It's not Sanskrit, it's not yoga philosophy in the sense of the text that you're talking about, but they're words that really speak to my heart. And I have got poetry books and storybooks that surround me in my personal practice. So sharing them is organic. It happens. And then the way the words speak to me, hopefully, translate to the people that I'm sharing them with. Is that your experience with the people that you're...
Yes, it is. And I think if it can be presented in a simple, accessible and practical way, and lots of it can, I really believe it can, and that is what inspires me to do this work and sharing with other teachers in this way as well. So I teach CPD for the British Wheel on this, using the sutra, training teachers to find ways of using the sutra in their teaching if they want to. So for example, in my classes, at the moment I'm teaching on Zoom, and I didn't know anything about Zoom till the day before I started. But it's going okay. It's going okay.
Good.
And I decided I usually teach in half terms, like a 6-week block, like schools, because lots of my students are mums or grandmas, and it works quite well. I decided to do 4 weeks because people were feeling really confined and they didn't know what this whole length of time was going to bring of being at home. So I thought a shorter time frame would be nice. We could kind of think, that's passed by, now we can manage another one.
Yeah.
And so in the first one, we looked at Santosha Contentment. How can we be content in a constrained situation? How can we accept it? How can we stay positive within it? So one of the sutra, for example, is when harassed by doubt, cultivate the opposite side. So it's about not, again, how I said about the habit, building the habits, not to rub the fear and doubt, not to be able to just rub it out, but to see the other side, like two wings of a bird, to be aware of both sides and therefore be able to hold a more middle path. So we did that for the first 4 weeks. We were looking at acceptance and staying steady, really, stability.
Yeah.
And then in the second month, some people in my groups were saying how difficult it is when they do go outside, that some people are coming close, some people are not social distance, keeping a distance. And so we worked with Sutra 133, which is friendliness, compassion, and maybe some dispassion if people were doing things that we didn't really agree with, or thought that, feeling strongly that they shouldn't be doing that when we don't really know their circumstances. So we worked with the bhavana, that Sanskrit for special attitude of compassion and friendliness, and just staying a little bit with your own, how you conduct yourself rather than having a view about somebody else. Coming too close in the queue.
Oh, totally. And have you always worked with the English translation, or have you done any delving into the Sanskrit?
I do work with the Sanskrit as well, because I like to, one of my key things is I like to go back to the source. So, and this is another reason why I enjoy working with Paul, because he does that. And then you start to notice Sanskrit terms in different places, and it helps you understand. You think, there's Shraddha, faith. And I remember thinking about that in that sutras, and here it is. You know, I find that it's like a web that starts to link up. First of all, you know a little bit here, and a little. I find I know a little bit here, I know a little bit there, and then it grows together like a network.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm learning to chant the sutra as a learning tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it, actually.
Our Sanskrit lovers. Yeah.
Because you've just been on, did you say you just been on a course with Sanskrit or working with Sanskrit?
It was a while ago. I did a course with Lucy Crisfield, and I just did it because she was at something that I was at, and did an hour session, and I just thought, oh, I love her. I love what she does. And I don't really use Sanskrit in my classes, apart from a bit of chanting at the end. But I kind of I've got an interest in ancient language, and I come from a Jewish tradition, and Hebrew has got so much depth to it, and each letter can mean something and be sounded in a certain way. And Sanskrit and Hebrew developed at the same time, or Old Hebrew did. And the depths that you can get to through the sounds in the language,
beautiful.
I love.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. It's mad to love that, isn't it?
I sometimes say I'm a bit of a swot, but not just in a kind of isolated way. I really like to get to the depths, to find the relevance, translate it into everyday life, and because it is so relevant.
Yeah, I think many of us who choose this path, many of us who've chosen kind of an academic kind of pathway into yoga, is because we love delving into it. And it doesn't mean that our classes are like that, but because we always want to read another book about it or learn something else because we love it so much. I wanted to ask you, actually, when you delve deeper, because you teach this now, and I know you've written books about philosophy as well. So when you went to write your first book about philosophy, where did your choice, you could have chosen the Gita, you could have chosen the sutras, you could have chosen one Sanskrit word to delve into. So where was your starting point, and why was your starting point with that?
So the first one I wrote is this one, and it's on Yama. And it's a course handbook, and it's for students, and the others are as well, as a few in the series, to guide students' practice. Earlier you were saying to me, what was your practice like? And sometimes we don't have a guide for our practice because of various circumstances, and then now I'm lucky enough to have that, but so some people look for direction with their practice. So it's a way of contemplating the Yama. So there's a phase of looking at ahimsa, then satya, and so on, with asana practice, with a developmental pranayama building over the period. And I think I started with Yama because I felt it was something very concrete, very practical, that people could link to and link their practice to their life. So rather than something quite remote, started with the first limb, something that people can really get a handle on, and And then I chose Dharana as the second one, and people were saying, "Oh, why didn't you do Niyama? Because that's the second list."
You know what? They're not. Someone, that's what Lucy said. It's like, they're not stepping stones.
No.
You don't start with one and then go to the next one and then, eventually reach enlightenment. They're limbs.
They're
choose whichever limb you want.
You can choose whichever limb you want. And they're all kind of going on at the same time.
Yeah.
And we kind of refining them in different ways, but all at the same time. So when I chose to do Dharana, it was because I was a personal interest. I was looking into that myself. And when I write them, it really helps me. Paul says to me, is it fruitful? Because you question why you're doing it, don't you? I think, why am I writing these books? And he said, is it fruitful? I thought that was such a good question, because even if nobody ever had one, it was fruitful for me.
Yeah, I would imagine if you're thinking, how can someone pick up this book and then use it in their practice? Well, how can I pick up this book and use it in my practice? Or how can I write this book and then not check that it works, but you know what I mean? Kind of check that it works in a way.
And I think also that it arose out of my teaching, because I would already kind of taught that in my classes. And I would do it like that over a long period. So, for example, when I was in my general classes, when I started to teach Santosha, cleanliness, I thought it might be like 1 or 2 weeks. It went on forever. Not forever. I'm exaggerating. It took much longer, because we started to look at things like no chemicals in deodorants, chemical-free body cream, healthful diet. It just grew out, and we spent much longer practicing with it, contemplating it. And you think, don't they get bored? Don't they just want to tick off Santosha and then move on to the next? But no, because they like to go back to it. My students really enjoy going back and thinking about the different ways that it can apply, and getting a bit more understanding. So, and then the third one, which is just coming out, is Niyama, and I kind of did think, well, it goes with Yama, but also that learning process, you just learn so much.
Yeah.
You understand it, then when you start to think how, just as you've said, when you start to think, how can I present it, you need to get really clear. To be able to write it. So
Oh,
I enjoy writing.
Not that I don't know whether I'd ever write a book. I don't know. I'm such a somatic, kind of feely person. But I love the idea of kind of picking a fruitful aspect of yoga and thinking, well, how am I experiencing that in my life, and how does it feel in my body, and where does it fit with how I am, and then kind of diarizing it almost. It just sounds lovely, actually, to do that.
In books, it is, because I love to do that, to reflect. And in the books, there are pages to make notes on reflections as you go through. You might do it in your notebook for your practice, and that's why I included those. And actually then over years, when you come back, it's different, isn't it? It's always different. You understand it in a different way than 10 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds lovely. So, coming into the present, I know we started at the beginning, and then we kind of really, really delved into philosophy, but it just felt like the right thing to do. It's really felt lovely having this conversation really deeply into the topic that we were going to talk about. What I'd love to imagine is when you come and spend time with us, it's going to be on the 24th of June, 1:30 till 3:30 on trusty old Zoom.
Trusty old Zoom.
We hope it's trusty old Zoom. I'm just wondering what you might not know yet what you're going to pick to share, and how that experience might be for a teacher joining you.
Okay, so haven't chosen specifically what I'll do, because another month the framework of people's experience might be changing. People, you know, things might change and we might be reacting to something we don't even know about now. So it will definitely be with reference to the sutra and something that can support us at that time. So it might be, for example, if people are going back out to work and there's some fearfulness around that. So it might be something about how to work with fear, for example, or keeping a positive attitude, or enjoying being back out and socializing, you know, enjoying that community aspect. But probably the group would just say hello and introduce one another, and then we'll do some practice around a teaching. So it'll be very practical, and then an opportunity for questions around it, or to ask, you know, you said earlier about teachers wondering how they can include it in their teaching. So I'd be very happy to share anything I can on that. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing your passion for yoga philosophy. I'm sure following our conversation, people will be interested in the other offerings that you have. So have you got a website, or have you got a Facebook page? How do people find you?
I'm Susan Lodge Yoga on Facebook, and my website is www.yogaviveka, which is Viveka. But if you search Susan Lodge, I'll come up there. So it's been, and the other thing, just to say, I really love it. I mean, I'm so pleased to be linking up with, just building community. It's so nice.
Yeah.
Meet really lovely people and who are doing really interesting work, and it's just nice to share. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being part of the Yoga Teachers Forum family. It's been amazing for me, actually, as an experience, to get to know all the people who've gifted their time and the people who've come along to share their experience as part of the group. If we just have the teachers coming along to share their time and the teachers don't come along to join us, then we haven't got the community. So it means a huge amount to me that you've joined us and that you've taken the time to experience other teachers as well. And what we'll do is we're going to put a link underneath here so that you can easily book on to the Teachers Forum event, and that you can find Susan and you can find other things that we're running too. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Susan, so much for this rich, lovely conversation about philosophy. And I look forward to seeing you next month.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.